So an oil and gas services group, their IT person decided that they were going to make an update and do some changes to their infrastructure on each machine at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. And they figured no one was working, so that would be perfect. Except for what we didn't understand is that oil and gas servicing firms, right, that work on oil rigs and look at fracking and this and that, they still operate overnight, even though there aren't a lot of people working. And what this person did is they updated the system, and those Windows updates pushed out for every single machine in the entire environment simultaneously at 10 p.m. And what does that do for the computers in that environment? It makes them unusable, which means they're not doing anything either. This is a terrible result. All right. This actually happened for an oil and gas servicing firm, and a friend of mine was talking to me about this literally weeks ago. And it was the purpose for this podcast, which is basically IT infrastructure changes. And what I identified there is one, which is maintenance and upgrading, but there are a bunch of other IT infrastructure changes that we can make. This is the Intelligence Quest podcast. I am Travis, here with my co-host Tylor, and this is episode number 6.
Well, hello.
So
nice to see you. I don't remember that story, so that's a good one. I've had a few of those in my past. Not on an oil rig for sure, but
I wasn't sure if we had talked about this off air or not, and so I didn't mention it in the pre-podcast because I was like, maybe he's heard it, maybe he hasn't yet.
Right. No, not familiar with that one, but I'm familiar with the outcomes, that's for sure.
Exactly. And so we're going to dig into IT changes. I know it doesn't sound that interesting, but it really is. And there's a bunch of different reasons why it's interesting. Something always happens in a changeover or in an upgrade or in an addition of hardware or in a new workflow. And that is just one example, and it made me think of it. And I know I can't think of any specific examples right now, but I know that Tylor has a bunch of these, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I did want to talk about one thing, which is in your intro, which is you are a stickler for change management. It sounds so lame, but you really are, right? To make sure that things work before they're implemented, make sure that they're implemented piecewise. And I just wanted to get your take on this topic first before we started some fun examples and some asides, as is always the case.
Yeah, well, what happens there is the stickler has come over time. I wasn't always a stickler.
I wasn't always like this.
No, there were times in my past when I just go in and update a system someplace, and then the system would go down, and I'd spend the next hours, sometimes days, actually fixing that system. Before you would take a snapshot or a backup or whatever it is that you do before you start the system. I mean, all right, you want a story? There was this one day back when I used to work in in a computer networking company that we all were working. I think we were still on NT4. It might have been the first part of Windows 2000. But it was probably NT4. So again, this is a long time ago, right? So stuff like this doesn't happen too much. But we got some notification. Somebody in the shop got an email that said, "Oh, there's a new virus going around. This one's really bad. It puts a new system service in your or .sys file in your Windows 32 directory. You really should help out your IT team by getting rid of it. You'll know it's there because it's a teddy bear icon." It's like, oh, well, Microsoft would never put a teddy bear. And I don't remember. Had I thought about it, I would look up the name of the file so you could find it because it was hilarious. When you deleted, we went in, we all looked like, oh my God, we all have this corrupt file. And so the recommendation was to delete it. So we deleted it and everything was fine. Nothing happened, right? I don't know. It was probably about an hour later when the guys rebooted his computer and it just stuck at that black screen when it starts to boot just before it goes in. It might be after post, but before the operating system loads it all. And there's just a little cursor sitting in that upper corner, just blinking at you, just looking at you. And it's going, dumb guy, dumb guy, dumb guy. That sys file was part of the security setup on the initial kernel load. And so it wouldn't load the kernel. It stopped before kernel load. It was critical. And we didn't really think of it. I can remember my friend cursing a little bit, using some colorful metaphors, and you silly, oh my God, that's so funny. Then somebody else rebooted their computer. Hey, my computer's doing the same thing. It's like, sys file. So we all found a copy of it and put it back, and the rest of us were fine. But again, okay, so what did I say? This was Windows NT 4.0. You know how you fix a problem when your Windows NT 4.0 won't boot? You reload the entire operating system from CD. So you boot to a floppy, and do the install program, so you come back with a very clean implementation. We weren't using, back in the early mid 90s, we weren't using a whole lot of group policy for all of these tool enforcement things, and so there was really nothing there. Um, and he had to install it. It took him, I think he spent a full day, because once you reinstall the operating system, you got to reinstall your applications, because they're not web-based, they're not cloud-based. They're all installed on your computer. They're all configured for you. There's a few configuration things that come down. But there's been a whole bunch of those in my life, and it's like that I didn't do a backup, or a corporation we're working with didn't do the appropriate due diligence to make sure that the new thing worked before you installed it. And when the world goes away and people are staring at you, it's really not very comfortable.
Yeah, so you're uncomfortable, and the solution to the problem, especially after you've created it and you didn't know that it was there, is not obvious. Right? So you gave an example of a solution where you could reload the entire operating system. The example to the solution in the oil and gas field is you operate the fracking units without computers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there were a bunch of these guys, my friend included, who said, we got trained by Schlumberger, which is a big oil and gas servicing company, to operate without the use of computers. This was in the early 2010s, maybe the 2012, 2015 timeframe. So there was a time when they were training engineers and field service engineers to work without computers. They don't do that anymore. And so he said that his buddy was the only guy in the field at 10 p.m. at night being able to take the measurements and the readings, look them up in the pressure charts, and make sure that everything was running appropriately for this 1 hour, maybe 30-minute window. And he said he felt like Superman, right? But it's 11 o'clock on a Friday night, so no one's there. He's like, I was doing it and no one got to see it, is actually what he said,
Right. 30, 35 years ago, the computer systems were a crutch for us. They were something that enhanced what we were doing. Today, they are the system. Back in the day, your cash register went down. Again, this is post the press the button and the little thing ding cash registers, right? But you could still pop the drawer out and make change. And today we just, people today, again, it's not good, not bad. People aren't stupid, but if you don't use that knowledge, you lose it. And so whether it's a point of sale piece of equipment, or whether it's some sort of an automated engineering system someplace, when the computer system used to go down, you just switch to manual, just make change and write the transactions down. We'll put them back in the computer later. It doesn't work today. I'm sorry, we're closed today. What do you mean we're closed? Well, the cash register system is down, and frankly, we don't know what to do.
Yeah. They had a backup plan. I remember I was getting a rental car at an enterprise many years ago, and they were running Windows updates. I got in late on a Sunday night because I'm teaching on Monday morning, and the backup policy was to use carbon copy, chick swipe, right? to copy the numbers on the credit card and then run it at a later date, essentially, right? Because they don't necessarily run it that way now, right?
Holy cow. I hadn't thought about carbon paper and imprint credit cards for a long time. My credit card numbers are even flat now. What would they do?
Oh, you beat me to it. I was going to say, they were like, do you have any credit cards with raised numbers? And I was like, I don't know. Do you? Like, you never even think about it. You never even you're like, oh, these aren't raised numbers anymore. And nowadays, right? I know one of my credit cards has the numbers are vertical, right? It's 4 digits, but they're not even next to each other. It wouldn't even work that way.
I've never seen one of those before. That's crazy.
And so I had to find a credit card. It wasn't my business credit card. I had to just take one that had raised numbers that was old enough, and they used it. They gave me the chick like probably 6 or 7 years ago now. But
geez, that's crazy. And that's the stuff that drives you crazy too, is when you see something in an order. Like, I'm used to a linear. I'm used to 4 numbers, 4 numbers, 4 numbers, 4 numbers. I had an American Express card for a while. It wasn't in that format. And every time I looked at it, it screwed me up. It was just so annoying. I stopped using it because I couldn't stand the format. I need my 4444. That's what I need. And they use a 4-number CVV. Screw that. I'm back to 3, baby.
I think Amex still does use a 4-number CVV, but that's besides the point. I'm back to 3. We're back. So, it's funny though, right? Because I didn't actually think that we were going to go disaster recovery with this either. But the recovery is almost as important, especially when you're the person who did it, or when the IT is the group. When something messes up and it's a problem and it was an underlying function change that maybe Windows rolled out or something like this, right? You want to make it better, but your heart doesn't drop as in like, I'm going to get fired for this. I can't believe I did this thing. When you do it, when you decide to roll a change out, when you decide to make an upgrade, when we take our medical business and we upgrade the computers, if something doesn't work, that's a problem we generated, and people have a lot less sympathy for that problem than a problem that was, inherent or made by someone else, for example.
Right. If something just blows up, if a chip bursts into flames and your system goes down, that's not your fault. You just fix it and you say, okay, we'll fix it the best we can. But you're right. When you make that change and something goes wrong, I remember many a time making a change and looking down, waiting for my phone to ring. That was the mark. Yeah, I guess it's going to be okay. The phone rings. It could very well be a resume generating event. You don't want that.
A resume generating event. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. So we did, Windows updates and these types of things. What if you're rolling out a new software? And I know that you've heard this story before. I don't know if you remember it from me, but I know I've told you this is a great story. A friend of mine worked for a home loans originating company, and he did software development for them. And they rolled out a new tool for the mortgage brokers that had all of the information in fields, and then it would store it in the database more effectively than them just writing it down and then putting it in different spots. They were trying to optimize the mortgage broker's time because they were getting busy. Their software development team was busy because their business was growing. So this is another thing, right? Their business is growing, which means they want this tool in production. And two things about this tool actually that are really interesting. The first one is they went to roll it out. They tested it in their test environment. This is what you do when the rollouts. Now we're talking about more dynamic rollouts, software or workflow updates. So they had a test environment, and they had the other tools, and they had the other tools on their current versions to make sure that nothing else broke when they rolled out this new tool in the environment. Yep. And then they scheduled a maintenance window, as you do. This sounds boring, but these are the things that you do. And right. Over the weekend, and he was on call as a software developer. Again, you're taking software developers and engineers and managers, people that get paid a lot of money, and you're asking them to take their time on their off days that they would have with their children to roll this thing out. And they rolled it out, and it broke. It did not work. And what happened was, you can kind of see where I'm going with this, but in the test environment that they tested it in, this was not the version of the tools that were in deployment in the active environment. One of the other groups had decided to roll their tool back because the current version wasn't working well and didn't tell anybody, right? This is change management. And I talk about this in the classes. Everyone rolls their eyes when we talk about change management. I know that they roll their eyes at you when you talk about documentation and change management. And then I give them this example. And I say, this is why it's so important. And so they had to roll back the tool, and they all had to go back and get on the same page about which versions are what. They had to test it in that environment again, and then they had to go through this entire process again to get that tool out.
Right. No, absolutely. And again, that's, change management. I'm a big firm believer. Again, it's not always been my policy. It's not always been corporate policies either, to be honest with you. I mean, I used to do some work for a pretty large insurance company up here, and they started with their change management. They were very firm what you had to do, but sometimes you just needed a change to be made. When you did a change management, like you said, you have to wait for a maintenance window. So Sunday night, 2 a.m., do all kinds of testing. It's a Wednesday, they want it done. They talk to my buddy Scott, third shift engineer. Hey, Scott, just go in and make this change for us, will you? And he'd go in and make the change. Again, this is 30 years ago, okay? So we don't do that anymore. But this is where you learn about it. So Scott would go in and make the change. They'd test it in a non-production environment, which we didn't always do that either. A lot of times we made our changes in the production environment back in the day. But they would this company would at least make their changes in non-production environment. He'd bring it in, make the changes, and most of the time everything went really well. And one time when it failed and a system went down in the middle of the night and all the regular engineers weren't there to fix it, it became a huge issue. When they tried to push it back on him, why weren't you using change management? It's like, now you have to wait for the day shift guys to step up and say, well, we told him to, but he shouldn't have. I mean, 30, 35 years ago, it wasn't really that big a deal. We made the changes, we put more things in place, but that's really where you learn about change management and how important it is, and having, you said I'm big into it, having a plan A and having a plan B, a rollout. But you know how I am. I go beyond that. I got a plan C. What if my backup plan fails? What am I going to do now? I might even have a plan D sometimes, depending on how important the system is. a lot of redundant systems today, we don't even do that stuff, right? When I make a change in a non-production system, and I kind of roll over to that system. And we got a whole bunch of different ways that we do things today. But it has been that long evolution, and I've had many a time when the phone's ringing and people going, "What's going on?" To bring me to this. Let's make sure we get all of our ducks in a row before we go anywhere.
And then you wonder, and then a young engineer wonders why Scott in engineering on the third shift is so grumpy.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, well,
I just asked him to make
Scott?
one change. Yeah.
He is very grumpy.
I just asked him to make one change and he won't even roll it out. And it's because we've been burned. You've been
Right.
burned. I've been burned. And so has Scott. And so
Yep.
has the software development team. And so has the backup and deployment team. And so has the IT team. And so has the people who are running tickets and the ticket folks, right? Because they're the first line of defense. And when you call them and you ask them just to do something, this is social engineering that we talk about too in some of our security classes. But you're trying to get them to utilize whatever pull they have to make a change for you, whether it's bad or good.
Right.
Okay.
And I mean, the thing is, it used to be okay. I'd like to tell you, and this is a true story too. We were teaching a class in this same company. And I said, look, I need a port open because I need to be able to access this resource from my office back into our classroom. And they said, well, we don't really like to do that. And I said, well, it's the only way I can teach the class. They said, okay. And they generically opened a high numbered port to allow me to have access from the training center back into this corporate training center. Do you think that there's any way any corporation today is going to randomly open a port so that you can have access? It's just not happening today, but it used to.
It made me a little sick when you said that. I was like, oh my goodness.
Right.
Right.
So that's the stuff that we have to deal with on a regular basis. Again, there's no real backup plan for that. Well, I guess there is. They said no. What are you going to do? Well, I just won't run that tool, or I'll bring something in else, which is probably what I should have done in the first place. It's not like, well, we can't teach that class anymore. They won't open a port. You find another way, another more secure way to do it, and that's really been the progression for years.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's just a million examples of this, and we're not going example by example, but we're talking about some cool nuance here, which is we talked about updates and we talked about software and tooling changes. What about like hardware changes, right? How do you roll hardware changes? Because you're not going to do a hardware change the same way you would a software change or the same way you would a Windows update, right? Because these things actually have to be physically changed out. Okay, cool, but they still have to go into production environments with mixed use cases, and you don't necessarily know exactly what's going on in those environments. So how do you roll this stuff out? I'll tell you how we did it. You and I did this in a medical environment where we rip and replaced PCs to support their new software and new Windows versions. So it was a multi-use rip and replace. And the first thing that we did was spec the PCs appropriately to handle the new software requirements and the new Windows requirements, and then even before you got there, I was on site and we put one in place. I ordered one with the specs that I thought that I needed, that we had identified. We put all of the software on that device and we put it in the production environment, not necessarily in a daily production, but in that production environment to make sure that it would work. So we did one and tested it. And then once the test confirms and you believe that it's true, right? Obviously you can't do this, if you're doing 2,500 of these, right, you're going to buy one or two and try and put them in place. And then and then you might even go piecewise, 10, 150, 1,000 from there.
Right.
But in this case, right, you're going 50 or something like that. You go 1, you go 50, and then you format them all appropriately. And then you schedule a maintenance window, and then you rip and replace them, and then you ask the team, which I had done ahead of time, what are some of the requirements to make sure that we met most of those requirements.
Right.
And so I had tested ahead of time. You were there for the rip and replace with me, and that's what we did. We replaced, a bunch of PCs in a medical environment with all of their HIPAA compliant software, the new Windows updates, the newest software that they needed for their new hardware and imaging system, and we rolled it out. And guess what? Even with all of your stickler for the change management and my tendencies to also be overkill, we still miss things.
Right. Absolutely right. Again, I remember that you also had approached the staff and said, hey, what would you like? So we know things that we need. You knew programs that needed to run. You had a system put in place. You did a test run with an initial machine, but you also hit the individual people that all have different components. Again, this was one of the things that got us too, right? This person has a mouse that's integrated with a ball. This person has an optical mouse. This person has a keyboard that's got special buttons. And not that it's a big deal, but the application supports it. So I get different drivers. Again, that's not something that we like to see. And in many cases, in many companies, you'd say, nope, you can't have your special mouse anymore. No, you can't have your special keyboard. I don't want to support all those things. So if you've got that environment where you want your customers to be happy too, then you have to figure it out. And sure enough, those are a few things in there that we missed. But again, the best part of that whole concept was to look what the specs are, look at all the specs that you needed, suggest a machine. Yep, that machine's okay. Buy the machine and try it. And in a small location where you're going to do 10 setups, that's not a problem. You can do it very easily. You know how many companies I've seen that some engineering dude sitting back in a desk someplace says, these are the specs, these are the recommended requirements, and they bought the thing. They brought them in. They bought in 10, 20, 30. I think it was like 30 computers in this other industry, this other small company I was dealing with. They brought in 30 brand new computers, put them all in place, and they didn't have DVI. I think the computers they bought only had HDMI inputs, and they were using DVI. It was one way or the other. So now you got to go buy 30 adapters or take 30 computers back. If you had just bought one test system in the first place, you go, oh my God, we don't have one of these. You know? Again, that's the big piece. So that made it just so easy for you to go in and test bed the whole thing first, and then just come in and make the changes.
And then the last piece is you never know how they're using it, right? We said we asked them what they needed, and then what happened, this actually did happen, is they were using a chat functionality that I had no idea. And we actually had an alternate chat functionality that was a cloud-based utility or web-based utility that they were supposed to be using, but they were using the embedded chat functionality in the HIPAA-compliant software. Okay, fine, but no one knew they were using it. And they said, hey, what happened to the chat functionality? I said, what chat functionality? Right? And so, you know, these are the things that can happen, and it does vary, and it just adds complexity. You said, oh, we could use adapters. Okay. Right. Well, what does that do? That just adds a layer of complexity that
something else
that something else could break.
Right. And we don't need that, and they don't need that. That when something happens and you have to go back in and troubleshoot it after the fact, you want to know how the whole thing was set up in the first place. Or even if they're going to hand it off to somebody else, or someone in-house is going to do it later on, it needs to be very well documented. And again, this is a big thing that you're a real stickler for. I go out there, sometimes it makes me smile a little bit. You open up your notepad, your notebook, your note encyclopedia, and it's every individual thing that you've done, but it's perfect. You don't ever really need to use those, but all of a sudden when something does go wrong and you hold on a second, I took a note on that, and you flip. Yes, right here. So most of the information you don't need, but you've got everything you do need rather than just trying to remember it. And I was always for years the remembering person. And now I took notes for years and years, and now I take pictures.
I'm gonna deviate here for a minute, but a lot of the technical folks out here will know that if you were, a math and science geek or STEM person, that you did a lot of these things in your head, and you probably are a ponderer and a tinkerer and not a note taker. And now you look at two guys like you and I, and we have our credentials in the bios of the podcast. We talk about them sometimes, but we have a lot of academic credentials. We have done this stuff, and we were, gifted in STEM, and just like all the other folks out there. And I did not like to take notes, and I thought that it was a waste of time, and I thought people who did it were lame, right?
Yeah, right.
And I, really, when I started taking deep, well documented, dated, signed sometimes notes was in graduate school. And I had such a dynamic relationship with the data. There was just so much data and so many changes that were made, and there was nowhere to look it up or Google it, that I had to have these notebooks, and I had to have them ordered, and I had to have them dated, and I had to have them in a stack. And I literally had a stack on like a bookshelf that you would see in the 1800s at Harvard. Not that that was not where I was, but you would see them, and you would go, all right, well, this one ended in December of 2011, so that means that the next one starts up in January of 2012, probably, right, or wherever I ran out of pages. And so you'd be able to find it, and you'd go back and you'd say, okay, this is right around when I needed that information, and you would go back and you'd pull that information out. And if you didn't have it, this is what it gets back to in our space. If you don't have that information, it really hoses you.
Absolutely. And again, it's been one of those things where for years I did the same thing. I never liked to take notes. I didn't take notes. And when I was in a class and I did take a note, it was usually like a 1-word or 2-word thing, and what it was meant to do was, it wasn't meant to give me details. it was meant to prompt my memory. I relied on my memory for everything. And, you can't just remember everything. I remember things by association, right, for the most part. So I would write down one or two things and say, yep, that'll bring it back. And, most of the time it did, most of the time. So when it didn't, I had to redo it or ask somebody else, and it caused me tons of grief, just tons. And so you do absolutely learn that over time. Again, it's another one of those things that you just pick up to make your notes. Or again, I take pictures today. I'm migrating to that. I'll take pictures of screens rather than take my notes. And then I'll store those all away on a Google Drive someplace with a topic, just like you said with your notepad, January 11th, whatever. It's already dated for me. I don't have to do that. I can make the title of my drive or my folder whatever project I'm working on. And I can go back in time and find that project, go into it, and find pictures. And I do still take notes. And I'll tell you, to be honest, a lot of times when I've taken notes, I could probably bring you up pictures of my notes because that's the easier way for me to store it and find it.
That's great. This goes back to one other thing too, which is where you back them up, where you store this stuff. And so I know, and I've heard you talk about this back in the day, right? But the backup dynamic wasn't as dynamic. Mm-hmm. So you didn't have cloud backups and offsite backups and tape backups and Iron Mountain and all these other places to store them. You just didn't.
Right.
And so what happens if you lose that data? What happens if you roll a Windows update and it reformats a machine? What happens if you lose a production machine that was in production for 15 or 20 years? And right. And this is one of the ones that I remember you being a big stickler for. You still are to this day, but it's not quite as big a deal. But I'll tell you, in medium and small production environments, it is do you still have access to that data, right? One of the questions you would always ask me is like, what happens if this thing fails? That was the question I remember you always asking, either myself or another engineer. What happens if this fails?
Right. How am I going to get it back?
And you didn't have an answer. Although I guess when I was younger, when I was very young for this, you would ask it as an open-ended question and you would have an answer, right? But when you're dealing with a bunch of engineers who know the environment, I don't always have an answer. And if I'm being brought in as a consultant and they're asking me, to help them troubleshoot this thing, before we make changes, I ask, right, where is this thing backed up? Where is it saved? What happens if this thing fails? And I will tell you, in small medical environments, the answer is you'd be so surprised at how many offices, dental offices, primary care physicians, chiropractic offices. There's primary care physicians, the penetration of private equity or larger firms owning these things is really high. So it's like 80 or 90%. So maybe your primary care physician isn't the best example, but a lot of these other smaller medical offices where your chiropractic, your dental, your eyes, your optometrists, and these types of facilities, they're single practitioners. 70, 80% of them are still single practitioners. And so they have one server that runs their practice management software or their payment system or these things. And they don't know anything about this. So they either have an IT group or they don't have an IT group. And if their IT group is good, they have backups. And if they don't have a good IT group, they don't have backups. Then what happens when your practice management software that holds all of your billing information, that holds all of your HIPAA compliant information, what happens if I didn't mention this earlier, but you've used this reference before. What happens if the little magic smoke just poofs out of the chip? Right?
Yeah, right. There's no smoke in the chip. They don't work. That's what you're saying.
There's no smoke in the chip, Scott. And Scott's pissed, right?
Yeah. Who let the smoke out?
Right. But what happens if a RAM stick shorts and then kills that motherboard, right? And as a result, it also did something to the read head on that physical drive. And now the drive is dead. And if you don't have that data, you are in a lot of trouble, right? And what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I mean, honestly, what are you going to do?
Yeah, rebuild it from scratch. That's really your only option. Then you don't even have everything. And I've had that before too. We've had to rebuild data from scratch. And it's like, well, if you don't have it, you don't have it. Again, I haven't dealt with that for a really long time because we have had tape backups and stuff like that. But we do tape backups every 24 hours. We did that, for years and years and years. And you have a failure at noontime, you have rebuild 12 hours worth of data. And so even in some of those environments that we use today, and again, this is where clouds and snapshots and, having information available back to the 5, 10, 15-minute piece is very, very important to us. And that's where we are today. But, if you had to rebuild 12 hours worth of data, receipts, whatever it is that they're being done, it's terrible. You've got 12 hours worth of logs from your firewall that something just crashed and maybe it was a hacker who deleted the data and you don't have backups of it and you can't recreate it and you just lost. It's a nightmare.
I know people who have, I know in some of the medical office IT groups and things like that I'm a part of, that I try and help and just contribute to, free and open source or whatever. There have been some folks in those groups, some medical office owners in, you know, small towns who kind of, they're their own one-stop shop, right? They manage and they repair all of their hand pieces, so they repair all of their physical infrastructure. They run their IT. I have a friend, this is a true story, who his wife has a physical therapy office and he has a dental office, and they didn't like the internet that was available at his dental office, and so they pay for fiber internet at the physical therapy office and have a physical cable running from these adjacent buildings just across the ground into his dental office to provision internet, I guess, to his dental office. But these are the types of things that you see in these small practicing offices. Right. And I have seen them in forums where their server dies, or someone spilled coffee on it, or it was in a fire, you know, something like this. And the fire, like, at least that's going to affect your building. Let's say someone spills coffee on it and they have no backups. They have patients showing up and for their appointments, and they don't have patient histories, x-rays. They don't even know when the time is that the patient is supposed to be there. They don't have the background information. It's gone too. And so, and they don't do some of the other due diligence. We're not going to talk full disaster recovery here, but you should be reporting. You need to then report this to the governing bodies and the agencies in your state and federal level, right? When you do this to patients for patient HIPAA data, this type of stuff, but they don't have it. And they're like, what should I do? And you're like, man, that data is gone. It was there and now it's not. Right.
And it's across, you know, sometimes when you talk about, you know, the medical practice, I do some work with a couple of different vet clinics. You know, it's the same type of deal. It might not be HIPAA compliant, but there's certainly a lot of responsibility there. Yeah. And I was just talking with a local car dealership here. It's not a dealership. It's where I get service oil and stuff like that done. I mean, and they are going to computers a little bit now, but he's got a desk calendar that he writes on. Because they don't want to deal with it. So when you want an appointment, he flips the little desk calendar up and does it that way. But, you know, that's not all. A lot of small businesses are using computer-based everything now. So, and what do they do? What do they know? You got a garage someplace that needs to do business. You got a small, you know, restaurant that's a mom and pop based restaurant in a small local town. They do all their inventory management. They do all their ordering. You can't, you know, back in the day when I worked at a grocery store back in the 80s, you'd pick up the phone and make your order. You'd call the guy at Associated Grocers and make your changes. We don't do that today. I mean, stores are completely automated. You check out, you buy 5 cans of green beans. The system automatically orders you more green beans. They just show up. Guy goes and gets the case. He goes, oh, we must need green beans. I got a case of them. It's a completely different system today.
Was that before or after spam came out that you were working at that grocery store?
I've known about spam my whole life.
All right. I didn't know if you knew that spam came out in like World War II. So this is an old joke that I made.
Yeah,
there.
I did not realize that. So I don't remember a time when there was no spam.
Yeah. Well, all right.
In two different, completely different.
We'll believe you.
Relationships.
Well, I want to share one more, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. But you were talking about garages, and this is what a huge nerd I am for change management, which is a crazy thing to say. And if my wife hears this, if she ever listens to this, she's gonna just roll her eyes at me till the cows come home. Another thing she'll probably roll her eyes at. But I was there I was having my car worked on, and they had changed their front office. And so I said, hey, do you looks like you changed the computers out too. Did you change your management software? And she was like, yeah, we moved from whatever it is, well-known garage management software to well-known garage management software too. Right. And I said, how did that go? And she rolled her eyes at me and she said, it was a hassle. And it always is. I knew that was going to be the answer. And I said, the more important question was, do you like it? Is it working for you? She said, it's working great. This is more of a business story, but she's like, but I can't get my husband, the mechanic, to put the details of the hours used and whatnot from each appointment in. And so we can't send the invoices out because he won't use the software and put the information in.
Right. Right.
Which is another component of change management, right? Which is getting the users to actually adhere to the new
Right.
software requirements. But it's crazy that you can't get, and this is, you'd say you go into big organizations, you're like, why can't we get someone to use this new tool? Well, I'll tell you right now, you can't even get the owner of their own business to use a tool that to get them paid, to make them the money. All he wants to do is work on cars, right? All you and I want to do is troubleshoot stuff. We don't care about who gets paid or whose hours or what, right? But those are the things that the tools need to be used for.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And usability is absolutely huge. Again, even if this were the easiest tool in the world, this mechanic guy probably wouldn't do it. But if he's got to go over and click and enter and find a description and put a thing in and find a drop, I'm with him, man.
And by the way, they made all of those for them to have the descriptions and the click downs and the billing and the timing of each requirement. Yep. They had to build that into the garage management, what are the GMSs, garage management softwares?
Yeah, the garage management, the GMS. Yeah, that's
yeah. They had to build all this stuff. And so when you make a change like that, that's called technical debt, right? Or basically the requirements that you need to make a change is deeper than just making the change. There's a lot that goes into that. And so when they make that change, it's hard and it takes a lot of time. And she said that they went to trainings on how to use the software appropriately and how to build their whatever their garage management software uses for modules for each of their things. And so, this changeover, we talked about it in terms of large organizations. We've talked about it in terms of small offices and very technical offices. And we talked about it here at the end with garage management software. It exists basically at every layer of our society now. And it's valuable, and it actually is much more interesting than you would have thought when we put this at the top of the show notes.
Right, absolutely. I give you one final piece to think about. Why don't you upgrade your home router and change your passwords? You're going to change your Wi-Fi password? How much work is it going to take you to do that? And that's just your house. How many things do you have in your house that use the same Wi-Fi password? You decide in your infinite wisdom you should change it. Imagine doing that for 10, 20,000 devices.
That is where we're going to leave you, because that sounds terrifying. Yeah. And I need to get some lunch after this if I'm going to embark on something like that. I'm going to need a lot of food. So,
fair enough.
As is always the case, engineer, break stuff, have fun, be careful with your change management.
See ya.